Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bankless AMA. We have this special AMA with Kain Warwick from Synthetix. Kain, how are you doing today, sir?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. It's been an interesting
Awesome.
week.
Oh man, it's been a crazy week. This is one of the craziest weeks on record. So I'm just going to go over a few of the ground rules. So Kain, this is an AMA. That means folks get to ask you anything. Feel free to pass on a question if you wish, but we don't want the Bankless Nation judging you for skipping the hard ones. So hopefully you'll answer a few of our hard ones. Now, as a reminder for Bankless members, you can ask questions in the Bankless Discord channel. So that's open to members. You can also ask on the Zoom chat. We are also streaming this live on YouTube for everyone else. And why don't we just get started? Since I am moderating, I feel like I get rights to maybe ask the first question. Kain, what is the scariest question you could anticipate on an AMA like this, sir?
Oof. I don't know. That's a really good question. I think probably the scariest question at the moment would be, what are we planning to do for scalability? It's the most topical, and I think it's something that everyone's very eager to see solved. And we've got some plans, but yeah, it's definitely an issue at the moment.
Well, you know what? That deserves a follow-up. What is Synthetix going to do about the issue of scalability? Gas fees of 300 Gwei are the new normal. So how does Synthetix adapt to that?
Yeah, I when I say it's the scariest question, it's because I know the answer, but if I provide the answer, a certain person named Jing will probably murder me. So we're working with the Optimism team. We've been working with them very closely. As you guys know, we did a demo of their L2 solution, a few months ago now. We're pushing very, very hard to try and get some sort of pseudo mainnet live as quickly as possible, given the current gas environment. So I can't give a timeline on pain of death, but it's close. We're working really hard.
All right, excellent. Well, I'm going to fire off the first question. This one is from Bankless member Oboshi. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but he's asking, or she is asking this question. Kain, you seem suspiciously normal. How can anyone expect to take you seriously when your nerd factor is so low? I think the question is, how are you so cool? The space is full of nerds. How are you so cool?
I don't know. I think if you actually spend some time with me, you might question that assessment. I mean, if you come into the Synthetix Discord, we sit around playing chess most of the time and making dumb memes. So, I think maybe it might just be the surface appearance of coolness, but it doesn't go too deep.
So, what is your nerdiest habit then, Kain?
Probably sitting around playing speed chess or yield farming, I would say these days.
All right. Well, that leads to another question, and this one is from the Zoom. Yield on the topic of yield farming. What are your
Or
thoughts on
yield
this
farming.
week with YAM's rise? All right. Well, and then also its demise. So this is like a 48-hour life cycle. What are your thoughts on everything YAM this week?
So I think it was Wednesday morning, and a friend of mine pinged me on Telegram when I woke up. It was about like 7 or something like that. And I was just going through messages. And he was like, hey, it was Santiago from Parapy. He's like, hey, what are you doing about yeah? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, this thing didn't exist when I went to sleep. Like, how, like, I'm doing nothing about it, right? And I was like, oh, I guess I'll have a look at it. So I started looking at it, read the blog post, and I was like, all right, fine, like I'll YOLO in and like put some SNX in there. Started farming it. And then the next day, like, it was the YAM apocalypse, and I was trying to scramble around and like get the SNX Spartans to kind of help out and delegate to try and get that proposal over the line. That obviously didn't work. So I think now the plan is, from what I understand, to try and work out a way of like launching a V2, have some kind of transition. But there's a number of proposals, so it'll be interesting because you can't actually have governance now. Like, governance has failed, so it's going to need to be this like rough consensus, which for me, I'm probably preferential towards. So it'll be interesting to see it play out now.
Wait, so does that mean you think YAM 1.0 is not dead yet? That there's still hope?
I
Now
mean,
that governance is eliminated?
I think YAM, the concept, is not dead, right? Like,
Yeah.
the transition from YAM 1.0 to 2.0 still requires the YAM community to kind of like come together, right? So it'll be a question of how do you coordinate that when the on-chain governance component has, exploded.
So this is actually a question that we're going to be putting out tomorrow in our Friday open thread, but it seems to me that the Ethereum community is somewhat divided over YAMs. So there's a whole chunk of the community that's basically like in DeFi community that's like, it was a complete sham. We shouldn't be promoting this sort of monetary experiment. It was unaudited, unsafe. And there's another side of the community that's like, hey, we're all adults here, and this is a permissionless system, and the creators of YAM can't be held accountable for the rapid success. What side of that debate do you fall on? Was YAMs a net positive for Ethereum and DeFi, or was it a net negative?
I think it was a positive, right? And maybe I'm a crazy person, but my view is I like experimentation, right? Now, typically, in the Synthetix community, we talk about doing like small experiments, right? So, we might do like a 4-week trial of like $10,000 in incentives, right? What I think we've seen play out with a lot of these, initial yield farming incentives is they start out with the intention of like, okay, we're going to put, even comp, right? I'm sure internally they were thinking, it's going to be a few $100,000 of incentives a week or something like that, right? And then it went from a few $100,000 to tens of millions of dollars in incentives a week, and everything blows up. So I
Right.
think it is really hard to kind of constrain that because there is so much irrational exuberance and excitement. But I still have a view that small scale experiments and on the grand scheme of things, $750,000 was lost or locked. It is a small amount. Collectively, obviously, it's not ideal, but you're right. Like everyone is an adult. Everyone makes their own decisions. Self-sovereign money is a double-edged sword, right? It's both positive in that anyone can do whatever they want, and negative in that people can do dumb things if they want, right? They can do risky things. So
Is it the case that you are pro experimentation? Because it seems to be the case anyway. That's sort of how Synthetix found its product market fit anyway, a series of small experiments. And if somebody said, hey, those experiments are not allowed, you shouldn't do those experiments. It seems to be the case that maybe Synthetix would never have found its product market fit. Is that a right way of thinking about it?
yeah, I mean, it's not even if. Lots of people said it, right? Lots of people said it at the time, like,
Yeah.
you're bad people, you shouldn't do this. Like,
Right.
this is a bad thing to do. Don't experiment. Like, it's too crazy and high risk and everything. And as much as we were pushing fast and iterating, rapidly, we have some people, core contributors like Justin, for example, who comes from, a large scale enterprise software background like MongoDB. He's not a lunatic, right? Like he constrains me. I'm probably the lunatic in the group, right? So he's constantly trying to ensure that we've got as much structure around this stuff as possible. But yeah, if we weren't allowed to experiment, there's no Synthetix. There's no question about that.
Let's stay on the subject of yield farming for a moment. So this question is from Gintama from Bankless Discord. So asking what your thoughts are on how yield farming is evolving. So that's another kind of area that's has faced a little bit of scrutiny, right? Now, I would say in some ways, Synthetix has been sort of the pioneers of yield farming, right? Like the YAMS, the YAMS smart contracts were really a fork of the Synthetix smart contracts. But at what point could yield farming start to get toxic or net negative for the entire space? And how do you see it evolving? Is it evolving in a good direction, or what's like the next chapter of yield farming, like the 2.0?
Well, I think it's kind of multidimensional, right? Like what we've seen is in one dimension, it's become more open and permissionless, right? Like we're seeing these no pre-mine, no VC, no team holding token kind of experiments, right? And I
Yep.
feel like the community is much more forgiving of those sorts of things, right? If people write some software and they deploy it, they don't get any privileged position within the system. They've got to participate just like everyone else. That feels sort of more fair, right? Even if it's maybe less fair from a traditional startup standpoint, that like the people who create a thing should get some stake in it. So I think that as we push in that dimension of, more openness, more permissionlessness in terms of, who can participate, it opens up the ability to do more experimentation, right? Because people are more forgiving of those experiments. And I think that that's really exciting, because when you take some of these things, like, even I was just reading about Based this morning, right? Another thing that like popped up last night. And it's I think what it comes down to is you're distilling the incentives down to their essence, right? And that's how we really start to see like what is effective and what is not effective. So I think that these experiments, these crypto economic incentive experiments, are really valuable. And we're seeing them play out, and they're playing out in a safe-ish space. I think the scales may be a little bit bigger than we would like, but overall, I'm really I think it's a net positive.
All right. So on the subject of experimentation, YFI and the Urine Protocol has been a major experiment in DeFi lately. So this is another question from Bankless Discord. What are your thoughts on Urine, including how Synthetix is being integrated with the project? I'm actually not familiar in what way Synthetix is being integrated into the project, or if it is. Maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting kind of backstory to how this all came about, right? So Michael and I were discussing creating an SUSD pool, right? And there was a little bit of tension there about how we should do it, and what was required in terms of effort and stuff. And the conversation kind of broke down, right? And Andre, this is how good of a guy he is, right? Andre, came to the rescue, right? And like pulled, said, "You're both being idiots, right? Like, let's actually, come to the table and discuss this. Like, this is a good thing, let's make it happen." And he talked to me, he talked to Michael, he brought us together. And he got the SUSD pool started, the incentivized SUSD pool started. And so then I think that kind of meta pool that was created, the Y pool, then took off and grew huge. And then obviously Andre kind of left for a while, and then I think when he came back, and he started this new the YFI craze, right? He took that same pool, but he didn't actually use the SUSD pool because the gas costs were too high, and there was some other friction around it. So it's a really interesting story about how it's kind of evolved. But my view is that, again, I think it's a really interesting experiment, and this idea of kind of I guess industrialized yield farming, right? Of like, really optimizing yield farming and ensuring that you're getting the highest yield possible is a really cool direction that we're seeing people experiment in. And, Andre is the king of that by far.
Yeah, absolutely. He is the king of experimentation, and quite an interesting fellow. So check out our podcast that came out this week on Andre. It was one of the most fascinating podcast episodes Dave and I have done. On the subject of criticism, though, because Andre has been, I guess, no stranger to criticism, and it does seem to be the case that a lot of DeFi protocols, even Ethereum itself, have been criticized at the very early stage of the project as like this experimentation is dangerous, or this will never work, and that sort of thing. What are your thoughts about some of the criticisms of Synthetix? So this is a question from Dorica. The criticism on Synthetix being a bucket shop, or the possibility of a cascading liquidation effect coming from traditional markets, similar to MakerDAO in March 2020. I guess everyone remembers the Black Thursday event in March, and the question of is Synthetix prepared for that? Or are there some risks in the platform that aren't immediately clear if there's some sort of a black swan type event, another Black Thursday March event?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very high risk. And I say this all the time. Like, Synthetix is still highly experimental, right? And it's kind of fallen into the same camp of these experiments that have grown very large, right? And so when you have the SNX market cap, edging up towards $1 billion, that's a little bit scary. There's a lot of value, locked in there. And one of the things that we have as a kind of offset to that, I suppose, is this very high buffer. Right, the collateralization ratio buffer, right? So, it was at 850, a few months ago. Yesterday, interestingly, there was a proposal that passed to reduce it to 700, which I was against. But no one listens to me anymore in Discord. So, that's just the way it goes, right? So I still think that we should keep it, as high as possible for now. We need that buffer, even with liquidations. But, people, are pushing for a lower collateralization ratio. So that's one way that we kind of offset that. The second way is obviously having liquidations. But, liquidations are dangerous because you can have this cascading, failure. Thankfully, we've never got to a point where the system was even close to the liquidation threshold. So I think that buffer is doing its job, and the fact that we have like weekly claims which force people to fix their ratios. But as we saw with YAMS, interestingly, right? Like, so the price of SNX was sitting around $5. 48 hours ago, whatever. YAMS switches on. A bunch of people start buying SNX to farm YAMS because it was one of the highest APYs, right? Price goes from $5 to $6. YAMS collapses. Price goes from $6 back down to $5 again. You can literally see like the chart, so it's still reflexive, right? Like it's still highly, highly reflexive. So
I've seen people call that the yamplification effect as it was going on. There's so many good puns with the YAM meme. I just,
it's amazing.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so but on that subject, is there a point at which Synthetix, you would call Synthetix safe, or like reasonably safe for more retail investors? We don't feel like you have to like put caution tape around the entire project and say, look, you could lose everything if you put it in here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take for any DeFi protocol to, because we've got platform risk, right? Like there's platform risk on top of platform risk. So you've got Ethereum platform risk, you've got scalability, issues, you've got all of this, inherent platform risk just in being on Ethereum. And then you've got the actual smart contract suite itself, which is complex. And, yes, more time helps, right? In 2 years' time. But when you're upgrading that smart contract suite, every time you upgrade it, you lose a little bit of that, right? Now, some of the contracts stay the same, some change, but the interaction of those contracts, is where the complexity lies. So until we get to a point where we stop upgrading the contracts, or we kind of lock down the core of the system, I think there's still going to be a lot of risk there.
Got it. All right, so let's talk about stable coins for a minute. So you guys have SUSD, of course, which is a pretty unique stable coin that's going out there. But a question came in about, I guess, the other side, less of a crypto native stable coin and more about central bank digital coins. What's your take on central bank digital coins in general? So it seems like the central bank of China, the People's Bank of China, is moving really fast in creating a Chinese central bank digital currency. It's likely that Western nations won't be too far behind. What's your take in general on central bank digital coins?
My history of stablecoin predictions is littered with abject failure to predict all kinds of things. So I would not listen to my prediction in any way. Like, I was saying nothing like USDC can exist like a regulated stablecoin for years, right? Like all through like 2016, 2017, I was like, it just can't happen.
Why did you think that, by the way?
I thought that regulators would be more skeptical of, having an asset like that. We knew that there were issues with Tether. It was operating in kind of this gray regulatory environment. I just thought, if you turn up to a regulator and say, hey, we want to do that thing, right, but we want to do it, under kind of some regulatory regime, that they would laugh you out of the room. It's amazingly impressive that, the sort of center consortium was able to get that over the line. I still find it really impressive. Same thing with Paxos, TrueUSD. All the regulated stablecoins, I think the fact that they even exist is pretty impressive. Obviously a central bank stablecoin has a lot of advantages in that, it is made by the regulator, the same regime, right? The regulatory regime that, is kind of dominating that particular country. So I think that they're more likely to happen. What the impacts of them are, I don't know. I mean, my hope is that, like the other stablecoins that we've seen, that it makes access to legacy finance easier, and it creates like a better bridge. But that remains to be seen.
Do you think it's good for crypto?
It depends on what they're built on. I think if they're built on like their own permissioned chain that's like a fork of something, then like maybe tangentially. But I think if central banks start actually issuing stablecoins on Ethereum, that there's no question that's a net positive, right? That's a big indicator that large entities like nation states believe that Ethereum as like the global settlement layer is a thing. So I don't know how likely that is, and I don't even want to predict it because I'll probably fuck it up. But yeah, that's my sense.
All right, so this is a question from Crypto Mooniac. So Crypto Mooniac wants to know what the vision for Synthetix is for the next few years. So the entire DeFi space is rapidly evolving. What's the place of Synthetix in that space? What are the aspirations of the Synthetix protocol?
Yeah, so I mean, this is going to be a bit of an alpha leak, I guess, but that's kind of the point of these things, right? So
Absolutely.
I think back to your earlier question of like, when do we get to a point where Synthetix is not so high risk that a normal kind of user could feel comfortable coming in and participating in the ecosystem? I think there's a number of things post synthetic futures, which are launching, that will help to reduce risk. So one of the things that we're kind of doing some research on in the background is the idea of siloing the different debt pools into asset classes, right? So at the moment, you've got this undifferentiated pool where you've got potentially equities, crypto, commodities, etc. When we talk to large scale market makers, they think that's crazy, and it is crazy, right? Like, there's no question having this undifferentiated pool is pretty wild. But it makes sense kind of for bootstrapping in the early phases. So one of the things we're experimenting with is this idea of separating out these pools. The other is when we have some kind of open interest cap on positions in the system, to switch over to some kind of hybrid model. And we're also experimenting with that with options, right? Where you've got the bidding period where it's against a pool, and then the tokens are issued, and then you have to go out to some other secondary exchange, an AMM or something like that, to trade the options. So we're starting to experiment with a number of things like that I think it's going to take probably 12 to 18 months to see that kind of play out and get to that level of scale. But at the moment, still very focused on this core undifferentiated debt pool.
So we did a tactic recently on your new binary options that Synthetix released. How's that going?
It's going well. I think the thing that's missing right now is like the vertically integrated UI, right? So one thing that Synthetix has kind of not touched is this idea of bilateral trading, right? This idea of creating a venue for people to trade directly against each other. We've stuck with this AMM model, and so what it means is that people can participate in the bidding period, but once it gets to trading, there's actually no place for them to trade. So what we're hoping to do through our grant style is fun. So if you're listening to this and you're looking for something cool to do, building like a fully vertically integrated binary options trading platform, which hooks into the Synthetix protocol during the bidding period, and then switches to either an AMM like Uniswap or Balancer or something like that, or even uses like some kind of order book style mechanism. We think that that's going to be really powerful, and until we have that fully vertically integrated solution, I think it's high friction. So.
All right, Selim, what's the incentive for them to build something like that, Kain?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, funding. Obviously, the grant style will help to fund it. The second thing is that we've got a program that's going to launch, I think, in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'm not 100% across all the low-level details, but it will essentially provide rebates for volume that's put through the Synthetix protocol. So if you are an integrator, or you have a DApp, or you have a mobile wallet or something, you can essentially apply to join this program and get paid a rebate. So if you are building this options platform, you can essentially get paid rebates for the volume that you put through the protocol.
Gotcha. Very cool. All right, let's talk about ETH2 for a minute. So do you think ETH2 will have a big impact on the Synthetix trading volume? That's a question that actually came in from YouTube.
I think it's too far away to tell. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty around exactly how we will implement, what the transition looks like. Our focus is, at least I would say, for the next 2 years on ETH1X, right? I think that's where the vast majority of volume will happen. And in order for that to be viable for the next 2 years, we need L2 scaling. So we need to be on optimism on the OVM.
So we're still getting a lot of questions from Fez, from others on layer 2. I just think it's top of mind because like we're still dealing with these high gas prices, and people are like, well, it's not even worth withdrawing my yams if it costs more than what I put in. Let's talk about that in the context of ETH2 first, and then maybe we'll pivot to layer 2 and DeFi. So in the context of ETH2, kind of my impression of the ETH2 roadmap is basically, like you said, like, phase 0 is not going to help with scalability at all. Neither is phase 1, really, quite frankly, maybe. But phase 1.5, before we get to 2x, we have sort of this data layer that could potentially host rollups like Optimism. Is that going to start to be helpful? Is that where, I guess, some of the ETH2 scalability promises start to kick in, do you think?
I think so, but there's a big but there, right? Which is like, the composability issue, and that's still the issue that we have with all of the L2 solutions out there, right? And so, we need some sort of coordination mechanism for the existing DeFi protocols to ensure that we don't lose composability, because if you lose that, these experiments are going to become much harder, right? A lot of the stuff that's happening at the moment becomes much harder.
So let's talk about that, because you guys are implementing your solution in sort of an OVM, right? Kind of a roll up. What are the rest of the DeFi projects doing? Are you coordinating with them at all? We were talking to Joey Krug on the podcast recently, and sort of use the analogy of the main chain is a little bit like Manhattan, right? It's getting really expensive to live there, and not everyone needs to be there. But a lot of people want to be there because Wall Street's there, because it's got all of the perks of being in Manhattan, right? You've got great restaurants, all of these things. So there's almost a like a game theoretical aspect where it's just like, okay, Maker, you guys move first, and then maybe we'll move. So no one wants to move from the main chain. How are the DeFi projects coordinating about layer 2 now, if at all? And how do you think we solve that problem of coordination to figure out what the most composable layer 2 solution is, and sort of settle on a set of those solutions?
I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of Brooklyn. That's where I spend most of my time when I'm in New York, right? So, I think the plan is we're going to set up, a nice area in Brooklyn where everyone can come and hang out, and you can come willingly or you can come by force, right? So, I think that the coordination is going to be getting at least a few of the projects to migrate across, and do it in a way that ideally doesn't break composability. So for us, what that means is minting, the actual issuance of debt can happen on L2 without impacting composability too much, right? It's the trading and the transfer of synths that needs to happen on L1 for now. And so I think what we'll see is a phased transition to allow minting to happen, at low gas costs, right? And then you'll be able to transfer those assets back to L1 and use them, and then slowly edge our way out of L1 onto fully L2 with the exchange and everything.
I think what you're saying is basically you're okay with moving some things to Brooklyn. You want to invite some other friends to move to Brooklyn too, and then you're going to make Brooklyn so awesome that everyone else wants to move to Brooklyn too.
That's the idea. Yeah. Invite's a strong word, though. Strongly suggest that they join us over there.
Got it.
So,
Got it.
yeah.
Let's talk about, and guys, everyone who's watching this, we are about 30 minutes in. So that means 30 minutes left for your questions. Keep them coming via the Bankless Discord, and also Zoom if you're there as well. Let's talk a little bit more about stablecoin. So this is a question from Joseph IT. Let's talk about SUSD. When it's over $1, how is that dealt with? Maker has had a lot of trouble recently maintaining its peg at $1. How about SUSD? Do you guys have some secret sauce for that?
I think there's kind of two levers that we can pull. The strongest levers within the Synthetix ecosystem. The first one is the collateralization ratio. So one of the reasons why that lowering of the C ratio passed was to ensure that there's more synth supply out there. The reason why I was against it is because I think it's less about the C ratio. There's enough synths out there to get into the curve pool, get into some of these AMMs, and reduce the premium, which isn't too. I think it's less than a cent, but it's been hovering around that mark for a while now, which is not ideal. So lowering the C ratio is one way of doing it, because you increase the supply. The issue that I sort of see, though, is more of an educational one, right? There's no interface that clearly communicates to you why this is a good idea, what the benefits are, et cetera. And so we're in the process of doing a bit of a brand refresh, and alongside that, we're going to migrate Minter, the Minter interface to staking.synthetix, and that staking interface is much more educational. It's much clearer about what your role is, what the trade-offs are, risks, etc. And one of those things is going to be to try and get more supply out into the market, and I think that will help to reduce the premium and get it back to the peg.
Overall, how does a SUSD compete against some of the other stablecoin options that we were talking about? Like on the one side of things, a central bank issued fiat coin, or even a CUSD, or excuse me, a USDC or a Tether or something like that?
I think there's two broad trade-offs, right? You've got the very hard pegged redeemable assets like USDC, USDT-ish, True USD, etc. And then you've got DAI and SUSD. And there's some new types of non-redeemable stablecoins, right? Like crypto asset-backed stablecoins coming out, and those just have a fuzzier peg, right? There's more risk around the peg. It's harder to kind of keep them really tightly pegged because they're not redeemable for the underlying asset. So there isn't like a really tight arbitrage loop to bring them back to the peg. But they have other cool properties, right? So with DAI, obviously it's permissionless in a way that USDC and USDT aren't, right? With SUSD, it's also permissionless, but you have this cool property of being able to convert it via Synthetix exchange or via the protocol to synthetic Bitcoin if you want, right? If you want price exposure to Bitcoin. So I think that there are advantages to the permissionless ones that trade-offs, right? Like the peg is a little less tight on the permissionless side, on the crypto asset back side, but they have some interesting, cool properties that, if you're building DeFi, are worth looking at, right? And I think for most people, they kind of get those trade-offs.
So here's a question that came in via Zoom. What were some of the lessons you learned from the 2017 ICO boom and Haven's raise? Maybe that's the context of thinking about 2020 is starting to maybe look a little bit like 2016. So what things did you learn in 2017 and what advice would you give for 2020?
So, prior to Haven, I was running like a Fiat payment gateway, right? And we worked with a lot of the exchanges in Australia. And so we were facilitating, even back as far as like 2016, millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin purchases, right? And then I think it was either late 2016 or early 2017, we enabled direct ETH purchases for the first time, right? And we saw a lot of demand, and I got really excited about ETH. I'd been kind of following since the DAO. Because this idea of like decentralized capital formation to me was really interesting, coming from a place in Australia where we don't have a VC ecosystem. There's a lot of brain drain. So you don't have good founders that have been successful that are kind of like giving back to the community. There's a lot of Australian founders that are very successful, but they live in fucking San Francisco, right? They don't live in Sydney. Right. And so, so it's an issue that we've been dealing with for a long time. And so this idea of being able to like bring capital formation, the DAO was like the most exciting thing that I'd seen in a long time, right? I was super excited about it. And when, 2017 came, I was participating in ICOs, I was doing all that sort of stuff and, holding ETH. And I think from me, it was probably like late 2016. I started thinking about, how can we solve some of the problems that we have? And in the other business that I was running, one of the problems we had was this like crypto premium that had kind of crept up, like the kimchi premium that we saw in Korea. And so we were like, there should be an easier way to move money around, right? And so this idea of stablecoins, I really went down the stablecoin rabbit hole, and that's what got me in. In terms of like lessons learned, I guess, certainly for us in 2018 probably is where we learned the most lessons, right? Like that was where it was the most painful. 2017, I think in a bull market, you just need to, kind of strap in and be along for the ride. It's in the bear market where you need to kind of batten down the hatches and really focus and keep building. That's where most of the hard lessons were learned.
So what do you think? Are we in a bull market? Are we heading towards a bull market?
I mean, ETH this morning, like hovering around 420, it's, I think we're getting close to it. We had that kind of false rally back in, July of 2019 where things started to kind of heat up a little bit and then fell back. My sense is that we're getting close to that. But I think the big difference between 2017 and now, and I said this a lot at the time, none of the things in 2017 did anything. Like It would, you know, and even the things that were, yeah, okay, that's probably not fair, but like very,
It's pretty
very
fair,
few,
I think.
very few, like very
Yeah.
few, right? Very few of the things, were real, right? Actually did anything. It wasn't until, we saw the launch of like DAI. We saw the launch of a number of things in like late 2017, early 2018, where like real stuff started to, arise that you could actually do stuff with. And even a lot of the tokens, like, okay, there were tokens, but there were this like, payment chit that you could like use for some ecosystem that didn't exist, right? Like it was not real, right?
Yeah.
And I think now what we're seeing is that, and you can see it by gas prices, right? Like, we're seeing that a lot of stuff is happening. There's a lot of activity, there's a lot of demand for access to L1, and that's just a very different, So I think to kind of, to close it out, like, yes, it feels very frothy in the way that 2017 did, but it also feels more real than 2017 did by an order of magnitude.
I'm gonna have to agree with you on that. That's exactly what I think I see. Here's a question that AMA Dio is asking in the Bankless Discord, and he's linking an article here. She's linking an article here, Washington Post. I can't open it, but I think it's a story about the U.S. seizing millions in cryptocurrency meant for terrorist groups. And the comment is they want to get miners to give assets over. I've not looked at this article. I don't know the news. So maybe this is sort of a general question on, what crypto calls kind of the final boss. Back to your fear that you were talking about earlier, that um, governments would never let stablecoins get away with issuing, stablecoins that USDC shouldn't exist, or you didn't think it would ever exist. How do you think crypto can survive the final boss? And do you think the final boss, being the nation state, will eventually crack down and turn its head our way? Are we just too small that, they just haven't done it yet?
I mean, I think it's possible, right? And there's certainly some component of like a race against time, right? Like the SEC is not the U.S. government; they are different beasts, like completely, right? So the SEC might say, well, Ethereum is sufficiently decentralized that like we're not going to bother it. That doesn't mean that the U.S. government or or China or the EU or someone doesn't decide that actually it is worth trying to crack down and set an example, something like this. But I do think that we are getting to a point where these systems are open and permissionless, and shutting them down. There were these kind of quaint theories in like 2015, 2016 of like people are going to go after miners and like go in with hammers and smash all the mining gear and stuff. And like, yeah, okay, fine. But like it gets to a point where, and this is where ETH 2.0, I think, the proof of stake, where you don't need giant, mining rigs and proof of work, where it becomes really, really hard. Like, unless we're talking like door-to-door sweeps of like anti-crypto, like it turns into like a kind of crazy, like apocalyptic, scenario to really shut it down. Maybe we get there. I don't know. Like crazier things have happened in the world, right? But my sense is that the cat's out of the bag. It's hard to kind of unwind this now.
This is back to kind of the point. The shirt and the movement says bankless, but I actually don't mind the fact that banks are starting to join. The JP Morgans of the world, for instance, they just made an investment in Consensus. They're building out their, JP Morgan coin. Coinbase itself, maybe going public. They'll have sort of Wall Street buyers. It does seem like maybe that provides a layer of protection on the industry, because crypto becomes more and more useful to the world outside of the self-sovereign individual crowd that maybe we come from a little bit more. Do you think that's a protection for us, getting some of the banks involved in building on top of an open protocol like Ethereum?
100%. So banks have this interesting property where they're these regulated entities that have databases that are money, right? Like they've got these little walled gardens where like whatever they say happens in there, like that's money, right? And then they have to talk to each other, and the way they talk to each other is like nonsensical, right? Like it might as well be carrier pigeon, right? And so the question is like, how do you wire these things up? How do you have like an open and permissionless settlement layer? And the hardest thing when you're dealing with legacy infrastructure, legacy entities and organizations, is that they can't agree on anything. They can't even agree internally on what they want to do, let alone externally, right? So you try and get these consortiums together, and it takes years and like millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and it goes nowhere, and then the whole thing collapses. I think if you forcibly move them on to this, global open permissionless settlement layer that none of them control, and it's wired up to these old school databases, I think you get a really, really powerful kind of next phase in the evolution of crypto. And I think it's kind of necessary. So if you want to live in the ether and never touch legacy financial ecosystem, great, right? But there are people that don't want to do that or can't do that for whatever reason. And having Ethereum wired up to every single bank and being the settlement layer for all of those banks is, I think, inevitable and going to just usher in like even more interesting stuff. There's a funny story though about this. So Brian Armstrong tweeted, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, about how Bank Frick in Liechtenstein, which is a regulated bank, had started accepting USDC as a settlement option, and I was super excited about this. I was like, "Holy shit, this is exactly what we were waiting." It's happening, right? Turns out, not so much, right? Okay. So I actually took the time. I went and I got in touch with the bank. And I got in touch with someone there, and it was painful, right? But I was able to get through it. And actually, what happened is they basically, they support, they've got a brokerage partner, right? It's not even the bank themselves. They've got a partnership with a broker that you can send Bitcoin and ETH, and they will convert it for 2% fee, right? And they'll settle it into the bank in, euros or USD, right? So it's not that exciting. And all they did was add USDC as like an accepted cryptocurrency. So it's not even close to what we were hoping for. So like, I was really excited. I thought we had like kind of bridged that gap, but we're not there yet. So there's still a bit of work to be done.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta dig behind the headlines and see what's really happening, what's really going on. But it is interesting because I'm not sure all of the banks will survive this transformation, right? So DeFi, it seems to me, is disruptive to banks the way that the communication protocol of the internet was disruptive to media companies like newspapers and such. And some of them adapted, some of them are still around, many of them are not. Many of them just couldn't cross the chasm and bridge the gap. And so I think many banks are just stuck with their existing models, and it'll be very hard for them to see kind of this new paradigm. I have a question that came in Bankless Discord from QAZ. This is a bit more specific to Synthetix. When can we expect limit, stop loss, stop limits, and other advanced order types on the Synthetix exchange?
So this is a story of decentralization, I suppose, right? So we put out a grant style RFP to a bunch of groups to build a limit order functionality because we just didn't have the capacity to work on it as a part of our core roadmap. And so a team stepped up and they built it. But unfortunately, the complexity of the Synthetix contracts is such that, when we went to actually deploy it, which was a couple of weeks ago, the contracts themselves worked, but the actual infrastructure for acting as a relayer just wasn't capable of handling the throughput that we needed. And so we've had to put some additional resources to kind of build that out. So it's one of the challenges of having these decentralized contributors that maybe don't have as much awareness of the core protocol. It does slow things down, but I would say limit orders are probably 2 or 3 weeks away. We're hoping to get them out by the end of the month. So the contracts are done. The relayer stuff is still to be built.
Sometimes, Kain, in crypto, in DeFi, we talk about 1 billion users, right? Like we want to onboard that 1 billion users. Here's a question from Joseph Turner. What do you think the weak link or the bottleneck is to getting those 1 billion new users into DeFi, into crypto?
So, again, coming from a Fiat gateway background, right? And having built a business that did that, the on ramps and off ramps are still very poor in a lot of places. We need either really powerful decentralized infrastructure to solve this problem, or we need better integration with legacy finance, or both, in order to be able to onboard someone who's in Southeast Asia or in South America, or somewhere that maybe they don't have access to, like a brokerage account for equities or something like that, but wants to have price exposure to equities. Synthetix can solve that problem, but you have to get them into the system first. Right. So, I think that having those really, frictionless and low cost, critically, it has to be low cost as well, on ramps and off ramps, is a critical component that's not quite there yet.
What are you seeing? Is there any progress on that front? I've seen things from Ramp, for example, also from Wire. Are those kind of the types of solutions that we should be looking at for those fiat on ramps for that bridge?
I think so, but people forget. In Australia, for example, we've got I think the highest adoption of like tap, NFC based payments, right, in the world. And like literally, I don't even carry a wallet anymore. I never have cash. So we forget that a lot of the world operates on cash. Like go to Berlin, right, and everything's cash. Like you ask someone to pay with a credit card, and they're like going out the back to find the credit card machine, right? So still, like, and there's a lot of places in the world that are still heavily cash based. And so I think you still need cash, actual fiat cash on ramps. Particularly in emerging markets, it's critical. So Wire is amazing, and that's great for like the US, but there's a million different ways you can get money into crypto in America. We need it for other markets for sure.
Just an observation. It seems to be the case, though, once money moves into crypto, it tends to remain sticky in crypto. So I found myself, even when, crashes come or I want to decrease my exposure to crypto native types of assets, I don't move to US dollars at a traditional bank account anymore. Traditional bank accounts kind of suck, to be honest. I moved to something like, a stable coin. It does seem to be the case that once the money does cross the chasm and bridge to the other side, it tends to stay there. Are you seeing that too?
I agree, but again, it depends on what money we're talking about, right? Like if you're talking about, your investable assets that you don't need for day-to-day living, then sure, right? But it's not necessarily that easy, to turn up and buy lunch with USDC, right?
Right.
Of course, there's some places where you can, and so again, I think we need ways to kind of close the loop, right, and allow people to spend crypto. There was a lot of effort and time and money invested by Bitcoin maxis back in the day to try and get people to spend Bitcoin, which was a bit of foregone conclusion, right? That was not going to work out. It was just too volatile, and I think we know that now. We understand that, and so we need that next. I think a lot of people looked at that and said, "Oh, well, people don't really want to spend crypto, right?" It's not about spending crypto. It's people want better payment mechanisms. They want better payment rails, right? They want cheaper payment rails, less friction, et cetera. And so I think that we can do that. And particularly with L2 solutions, spending DAI, is something that I think is needs to be much easier. You need to be able to spend DAI and SUSD and other stablecoins anywhere in the world.
Hold your ETH, spend your DAI, spend your SUSD, but hold your ETH.
There you go.
That's the mantra. All right, let's do some rapid fire questions because we have
Ryan,
10 minutes left.
Can I hop in here with a question?
Yeah. David.
Yeah. So for those watching on YouTube, you won't be able to see my face, but everyone in the webinar can. So Kain, we've been talking a little bit about on-ramps, and we've also been talking about fractured L2s, right? And so L2s are going to be not really all that interoperable. There's going to be some friction there. And so that's going to kind of fracture liquidity. And you just mentioned how we also need on-ramps. And there's also plans for Synthetix to migrate to L2s into the future to encourage trading volume. And it sounds like that we can also talk about on-ramps directly into Synthetix, into their whatever L2 platform that Synthetix is on. So is there a potential future where there's an on-ramp that goes straight from the fiat world right into the Synthetix platform, bypassing Ether, bypassing DAI, bypassing USDC, and just going straight from bank to SUSDC?
Potentially, but I think we're still a ways away from that, right? Like I still have a sense that most on ramps are going to go via ETH, and there will be versions of ETH on these L2 shards as well, these L2 chains. So I think that some kind of tokenized ETH that's low cost to get access to is still pretty likely. But it could be DAI, it could be SUSD, it could be even USDC or one of the other stable coins. I mean, one of the interesting things about Synthetix is that we've got other denominations of stablecoins as well, right? And you can convert between them pretty frictionlessly. So if you want to get in with Euro or something like that, then you've got access to that. So I think that is something that, again, we need the infrastructure side as well. L2 helps, but it's the actual like on the ground infrastructure that's missing right now.
All right, we've got a few rapid fire questions from the Bankless Nation. I want to try to fit these in the last 7 minutes here. Here's one. What do you think the weak? Wait, actually, we asked that one already. If you could snap your fingers and fix a problem in the crypto space, which problem would you solve, Kain?
Scalability.
Okay. How about the current incentive programs in Synthetix? Did they meet your expectations? Do you plan to keep them, or are you going to tweak them moving forward? Is the community going to tweak them moving forward when this current phase ends?
So the next big incentive mechanism that's coming out is around this, rebate for integrations as well as direct trading volume. So that's something that we're pretty excited about, and I think it's going to have a big impact.
How about gas fees? Do smaller stakers of Synthetix, are they them being priced out of staking, claiming rewards? Has that had a material impact to the Synthetix ecosystem so far?
It has a material impact to my sleep at night. It doesn't sit well with me. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're a small staker, and obviously Sybil attacks notwithstanding, right? If you're a small staker and have been a small staker, I wouldn't be surprised once we get you onto an L2 solution that lowers your cost, if you would not expect some kind of incentive or compensation or something like that from the Synthetix DAO for your troubles over the last 3 months.
Who is your historical founder that you identify most? Is it a Musk? Is it an Edison? Is it a Tesla?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm a big fan of Ben Horowitz. I'm actually reading, What You Do Is Who You Are right now. I'm a really big fan. I think just his approach to to running startups is not necessarily unique, but like it's very much his own style, and it's something that the hard thing about hard things, when I first read it, really resonated with me. I enjoy doing hard things myself. So
That was a fantastic book. It's one of my favorites as well. Is Argent your favorite mobile wallet?
my favorite mobile wallet, it's up there. I live on desktop and I live with my Trezor. Like, I don't use mobile wallets that much. There's a bunch of them that I like, but Argent is definitely really cool. Although I saw that they're not paying for gas anymore for obvious reasons. So that's not ideal, but it's just the world we live in.
Maybe you should get them to move to Brooklyn with you, Kain.
Working on it. Working on it.
All right, this is a fun one. Price predictions. Give us your bull run price predictions for first Bitcoin, then Ether, then SNX.
So Bitcoin, I think if this is genuinely the bull run that we've been waiting for, 50K plus is definitely possible. For ETH, I don't have an upper limit. I don't want to look like an idiot in 12 months time. I think that ETH is highly reflexive, and if we get some of the things that we're hoping to around L2, etc., 1400 is going to look laughably cheap in the future.
How about SNX? You want to do that one?
I mean, $6 was the meme, right? That we all kind of laughed about back 2 years ago. So I'm happy with $6. I think we touched $6 yesterday. I'm pretty happy with that for now.
Price prediction for SUSD, still $1, I hope.
If it's not $1, we got bigger problems. So yeah, like $1 plus or minus 1%, I'd say.
All right. Do you see tokens? This is a question from Sid Powell. Do you see tokens in the future more taking the form of like an equity revenue sharing in the platform, or more usage utility, like paying fees in MKR? The comment is Synthetix appears to be a hybrid between the two. I guess the question is, how do you see DeFi tokens in the future accruing value?
I mean, I think, there was a long time where there was no value being generated, right? Like there were these proposed ecosystems that didn't do anything, right? And I think we now have a bunch of different systems that actually generate, value, right? Like they provide a service and people are willing to pay for that service. And so the question of how you accrue that, whether it's a burn model, whether it's, direct payment for, whether it's through some kind of inflationary incentive, et cetera, I think, I'm just happy that tokens are not this, black mark and this kind of unmentionable thing anymore, right? There was a period where like having a token was like the worst possible thing you could do. So the fact that we're back to like understanding tokens are a coordination mechanism that is really powerful, that's more than enough for me. I'm happy with that for now.
All right, guys, we have 2 more minutes for questions. We might be able to fit in 1 or 2. This is one for me. What is your favorite DeFi collateral for Synthetix besides SNX?
I mean, ETH, obviously, but aside from ETH, I would say probably right now, Ren BTC is the thing that I'm most excited about. I think that will be a thing that will happen. I mean, we like market forces to determine things, so any permissionless BTC implementation. So obviously TBTC being the other option, we will definitely consider, and maybe both of them will be included. But we need to get BTC collateral, I think, to pull the maxis into ETH land.
Kain, is ETH money?
Of course, absolutely. I think I gave it to someone, but I had ethasmoney.eth for a while as an ENS domain, and then I gave it to someone on Twitter to use. Maybe even I can't remember who it was, Scott, or I don't know, maybe you guys.
I would have liked to stash that one up. Actually,
a bunch of them I gave expired. It to someone. I gave it to someone, so
my money's on Eric
they
Connor.
renewed it.
Yeah, probably Eric Connor.
Eric, that makes sense. Yeah,
he tries to front run everybody on those things.
Yeah.
All right, we've got 1 minute left so it's time for our final question. And Kain, thank you so much for spending some time with the Bankless Nation. Bankless Nation, thank you so much for your questions. This has been an absolute blast. We will post the recording. I think the recording actually will be auto posted on YouTube. Thanks for all of the participation. Yeah, immediately, David says. So the last question is, Kain, how can the Bankless Nation help Synthetix?
I think what we need is more people participating in governance, right? So we have this rough consensus process, but there's a lot of things that are still open questions and experiments that are running, and so we need more people scrutinizing the things that we're doing and participating in that governance process to ensure that we've got really strong checks and balances on the direction that the project's moving.
Fantastic. We're getting great feedback. People are saying great AMA. Thanks to all. Kain, we want to thank you again for spending some time with us. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. This was really fun.
Take care.